I usually don't lose any of it. The uterus actually is not in a secure place when it's pregnant. You know, if you never get pregnant, then the uterus is going to be just fine. But not in the case of pregnancy. And so we find that there are actually 4 membranes that help to hold the uterus remain where it is. I remind you, now, titled is Membranes that Hold the Uterus in Place. There is the broad ligament. Now, you think of ligaments like in, you know, back in 121, where ligaments were these tough things on the outsides of your knees. And this is just, you know, a membrane, but it's not stretchable. It's made of collagen. So we tend to use the name ligament, even though I would use membrane. And you recall that the broad ligament runs wall to wall. And it actually divides the pelvis into an anterior and a posterior portion. There is, and that helps to hold the uterus in place. There is the, whoops, I almost said mesotherium, not that. There is the round ligament, which looks more like the proper ligament, which holds the top of the uterus to the wall. There is the pretty obvious uterosacral ligament, which holds the uterus to the sacrum. Just another nearby place of convenient attachment. And then lastly, there is the cardinal ligament, not named after the ball team. And the cardinal ligament holds the uterus to the pelvic floor. And actually, I've not seen a diagram. I've not seen a diagram, nor can I show you one with my document cam dead. Even the illustrations I could show you don't really have that. Now, why do we need all of these? Because it is entirely possible for the uterus to get in a bad position. Time out, editorial. By request, I got notes up on WebCT on our website, and actually I noticed that some of you have already accessed them. I could even see names of those who accessed them. By the way, if you ever take an online course, they know everything about you. You know, even if your underarm deodorant's not working or something like that. I don't know how they know that, but they know every minute you spend and files you go to and stuff like that. So it's kind of like, you know, hey, how'd you enjoy that book I wrote? Oh, great, cover to cover, you know. And you didn't touch it. Well, you know, if you're not studying, it's not. I'm blabbering. These notes are up there, and one of the things that I point out is that the uterus has good positions, but it also has some bad positions as well. If you take a look at the angles, you'll see that the cervical canal is at about 90 degrees to the vagina. That's the normal design. In other words, it's tipped forwards. And we call that position anteflexion. Anteflexion. Guess who came to visit over the weekend? Anteflexion is good. That's its proper position. However, there is a malposition, which is called retroflexion. And this is a malposition. One word. Seldom do you actually get born that way. It's often a consequence of childbirth. But if you overstretch these ligaments and the uterus settles in tipped backwards, if you ever hear someone say, and again, have you ever heard some woman say, my uterus is tipped? How many of you have heard that? A few of you. Okay, it's being used out there. What they're referring to is retroflexion. Now, as you can see on my diagram, if you take the uterus and tilt it backwards, that means the opening of the cervix is now pressed up against the wall of the vagina. That can cause 2 problems. It can cause menstrual difficulties if you block the external opening of the uterus. It can cause conception difficulties known as infertility because of that. Plus, I don't know, I assume that once you get pregnant that the uterus kind of assumes its normal position, but I can't guarantee that. I'm not that far into gynecology. There's one other malposition that occurred. It's called a prolapse. And a prolapse, we can call this a sagging into the pelvic floor. And that's usually because of a weakness of the pelvic muscles. I presume that in our primitive days, where women hauled, you know, their previous infant on their backs and carried the firewood and things like that, that they did an awful lot of exercise that kept their pelvic floors in shape. We tend to sit around and just work all evening, you know, answering our email. And I think that we do have kind of an endemic lifestyle problem with weak pelvic floors. Kegel exercise, we may mention that when we get to childbirth, but strengthening the pelvic floor is a good thing. Okay, so those are perhaps helps us to understand why we don't have as many troubles as we could have, is because we've got a good set of these ligaments that help to keep the uterus in its proper position. I also had a note to myself about cervical cancer. I had mentioned that it was prone, but I simply failed to mention that we've uncovered one of the reasons why we tend to have more cervical cancer than before, and that's the HPV, which stands for human papilloma virus. Did I do that right? Mm-hmm. Okay. There's a link in my notes, but I'm not working off of that right now. And this particular virus, it does not necessarily cause pain, difficulties, or death. Do not confuse this with HIV. But if you acquire this human papillomavirus, it for some reason really encourages cervical cancer. They have a vaccine against it, and surprisingly, it's controversial. Two things. Number one, vaccines became controversial when a fake article was published in the British science magazine, The Lancet, L-A-N-C-E-T. That, about 12 years after it was published, was retracted because it turned out that there had been faking of the data, etc. It showed a correlation between vaccinations and autism, which is not there. And if you can look at the studies and not the panic-stricken websites, you'll see that you're far better off not dying of the things they vaccinate you against than the false risk, which is not, there's no correlation between that, the false risk of the vaccinations and autism. Anyhow, that's one concern. The other reason that this became controversial was that they said, well, my 14-year-old girl does not need to have this vaccination because she's a good girl, not having sex and therefore not being exposed to the human papillomavirus. That may be completely true. How do you know that the man she marries very faithfully didn't pick up the human papillomavirus? And so your daughter, who has led the life of a nun until she leads the life of a wife, could still wind up being exposed to that virus. And so every 14-year-old, 12, I don't know the age they recommended. Somebody knows.
11 is last I heard.
Okay, before they start menstruating, yeah, okay. But, you know, it ought to be done. No harm in it. No moral judgment in having it done. It's to protect others. Didn't mean to bold that. Okay, so those are two things. And it turns out that there's real strong correlation between the spread of human papillomavirus and the increase in cervical cancer. So I just wanted to mention that. Information will continue to come out in that particular area. Okay, where did that leave us after catching up on those? We did hysterectomy, let's take a look at the blood supply, the endometrium. I was actually looking for good illustrations of the endometrium. It turns out that the ones in your textbook are superior to anything that I could find on the internet, and certainly what I would like to illustrate for you. So let's kind of sketch it anyway. You sort of get an idea for this in lab, but not completely. Here we go.
This is the myometrium, which means it's made of what kind of muscle? Smooth muscle. That's the muscular part. No conscious control over that. Doesn't matter if you're down to the final quarter of the last biggest game of the year. If that uterus wants to give birth, you really just can't say sorry. All right, then the innermost layer, and this here is the uterine cavity, the inside. Now this represents the endometrium. You begin to get the idea that metrium is that root word that refers to the uterus. I don't know any other words that we've used in that. I mean, yeah, endometriosis, sure. But using metrium as a root word, I'm sure there are some, but too technical for us. Anyway, this is the inside of the uterus, the endometrium. And first of all, there are glands there, which I may have mentioned earlier. So we'll draw these. Now you know from laboratory that you can't follow them like this. They kind of rotate around, but we have to draw them rather simply. These are the uterine glands, and they secrete a nutrient-rich mucus. It will be 1 week after fertilization before that embryo implants on the lining of the uterus. And during that week, it just simply is bathing, like soaking in a bath of chicken soup. It's got this nutrition that it absorbs to help keep it alive while it's in the process. Now, these uterine glands are supplied by blood vessels. So here come these blood vessels here. And what is curious about these blood vessels is they travel rather straight, and then they start to do some spiraling. Straight, and then they spiral, kind of like that. And although, again, you can't see this well under the microscope, where we would definitely look for it, this divides the endometrium into 2 layers that we can identify. This portion here is known as the stratum functionalis. It's actually the part that you lose in menstruation. It used to be called stratum decidua, which was better. You know, our deciduous trees are all giving up and dropping their leaves. And this part down here is known as the stratum basale. Basale. And I may be wrong on my last syllable there. But so you got the part down here that is not shed, and the stratum functionalis that is shed. So let's make a note on that. The stratum functionalis is shed during the time of menstruation. The stratum basale is never. It is not shed. It is permanent. And even the little arterioles have a name. These are, it's very descriptive. These are called the straight arterioles because they are straight. So it's a straight arterioles, and these are the spiral, sometimes called coiled, but spiral is the term they use. Spiral arterioles. And that's a puzzlement. What a strange thing. Arteries usually go straight because anytime you got distance, you lose pressure. Pretty much all your arteries don't meander the way your vessels do. I think I just saw an IT technical person walk by the door. Will he walk in? Probably not. They're sitting outside listening. Yeah. Okay, they were at him. I'm going to stick my head out there. What's up? What are you doing with my phone call? My overhead cam is equipment, but it's got lights, and you know, okay, that'd be good. Yeah, if they can, if it's nothing that's you, but you know, I don't know what you. I left a message today. Thank you. They're here for some other problem. Okay. What was I talking about?
Materials.
Yes, okay. It's a built-in weakness. It's very deliberate. And just to give you an idea ahead of time, when we get to the menstrual cycle, 5 minutes, when we get to the menstrual cycle, we'll find that when progesterone level drops, the uterine gland stops secreting, that shrinks, and those spiral arterioles actually get blocked off like bending a hose. It's a built-in deliberate weakness. It's like in your checkbook, remember checkbooks? Where you can pull it out because it's got a dotted line that's perforated. And you say, what's the advantage of that? Well, hold that question. We'll get to that. The real question is, how in the world do you figure out your grade in this course? Drives some people nuts. I will say this, that one of the first problems that people have with figuring out how they're doing in the course is they make the mistake of trying to remember how many questions are on each exam. No, it's just simply a percentage. If you made a beef stew, and I want to know if it's too salty or not salty enough, does it matter if I taste 1 spoonful or 2 or eat a bowl of it? It doesn't matter. I now have evaluated the saltiness of it. And so whether I use 50 questions or 100, I have evaluated your saltiness. And I put that down as a percentage. And so if you're trying to figure out your grade, don't ever think about how many questions were on an exam, because it is just strictly, was I salty on the exam or not salty enough? And so we've got 3 exams in lecture and 3 quizzes. That's 330 points possible, no matter how big or small the exams are. And then 100 points out of lab, and you say, well, gosh, if this quiz is 18 and that one is 10. No, no, no. We just taste it for saltiness. All you get is a percentage out of laboratory. So maybe your saltiness in lab was 88% or something like that. So that's out of 100, and that gets carried over. Total, 430 points possible. 100 from lab, 330 from lecture. And that's the number possible, and then it's just a fraction, the number that you got right. Just like for each individual exam, the number that you got right divided by the total number possible. But for some people, that arithmetic is a little rough. So if you get stuck, ask a friend, ask me, and we'll help you out. Okay, which some of you have been doing so. Now that's basically the blood supply. The blood supply is so straightforward, we don't really dwell on it much. You know, you've got uterine arteries, arcuate arteries that crawl over. I'm not going to write them down. You think they're important. To get to the muscle, however, there are arteries that I wish to name. And the arteries that go through the muscles are called radial arteries. And I want you to know about them because I was with a woman that had to have a cesarean because of those radial arteries. Let me explain how. Most women, when they are in labor, there's a period of rest between each contraction. Peaks out, settles down. A little bit of rest. You know that if you squeeze on something, squeeze the skin, put on a tourniquet, you stop the flow of blood. And so during a contraction, the radial arteries are compressed because that's the wall of the uterus trying to give birth. And then during the rest period in between, blood flows, baby's heartbeat speeds up. It says, oh, oxygen, thank you very much. You know, oh, here comes another contraction. It gets quiet. But this lady was not having a break between contractions. It's like working 2 jobs. And so, you know, she would have a contraction and it would settle down. And then she'd go right into another contraction. And as a consequence, her radial arteries never had a break between contractions to run blood to the endometrium, which is where the fetus gets its oxygen. What do you think was happening to the fetal heart rate? It was dropping. Yep, so they've got equipment. It looks like a harmless little, you know, labor room that you're laboring in, but they've got everything needed. Within minutes, you know, they pop open doors and we're moving into a cesarean. And about 5 minutes after that, the baby was delivered and she was fine, but she was just not getting the break in between. Anciently, 100 years ago, she would have perhaps died during childbirth, maybe the baby as well. Don't know. And that would have genetically kind of weeded that out of the population, it seems. But thanks to modern medicine, most of us manage to get through difficulties like this. That's a good thing. Don't worry about the genetics. We'll fix that someday. Okay. That's the circulatory and the 2 parts of the lining. Now,
Again, I'm stuck without illustrations on this. Can I just like jump over that to function? Yeah. I'm going to wait until, to talk about the triangles of the perineum and things like that, basic anatomy. And it's so very visual, I want to be able to show you. So let's jump on to the menstrual cycle. And your notes will be slightly out of sequence, but that really doesn't matter. Menstrual cycle. We talked before about how it's based on menses, which means month. But it all starts in the hypothalamus. No, I don't dare start taking notes on that because they might start poking. So let's do it up here. The hypothalamus is what decides that it's time to begin the menstrual cycle. So from the hypothalamus, that of course is going to goose the adenohypophysis to release the hormone FSH. And as we know, that takes us from the little primordial follicle to the big old Graafian follicle, vesicular ovarian follicle, like that. You know that. And so what happens in the ovary is we develop the, what's the old name for it? Graafian follicle. We develop the Graafian follicle. Now, the Graafian follicle, of course, is famous for cranking out estrogen. And so when we are preparing to ovulate, we begin to develop external signs of reproductive readiness. Now, we then have ovulation caused by what? Well, the next hormone is, of course, LH, which, remember what it does. LH causes ovulation, can't say this often enough, and it causes the formation of the corpus luteum. So Mittelschmerz occurs in some women, and then under the influence of LH it becomes this corpus luteum. So, let's see. Graafian follicle then ovulates and becomes the corpus luteum. Howdy.
Hello. Does it not go?
Well, it lights up,
Okay.
and but when I press still happy, it doesn't. And I walked over and poked at the back, so I don't know what the key is. I hope it's something simple. Push the button. I'll let you poke at it in a minute. Anyhow, so your corpus luteum, remember, produces that other hormone that we need to know about, which is progesterone. Two functions of progesterone. Causes uterine glands to secrete. Let's make a note of that. It causes uterine glands to secrete. And what's the other big thing that it does? I didn't really hear it. Blocks FSH. That's what it does. Principle again being that you do not want to menstruate when you're, or ovulate, either one, when you're 3 months pregnant. By the way, I've had a woman say to me, you know, my doctor told me that I was menstruating during my pregnancy. I said, the doctor was patting you on the head and saying, you know, don't worry your little brain about it, it's just like. But you don't. If you menstruate in the middle of your pregnancy, you have an empty uterus, because that means you've lost the lining of the uterus. But there are women who bleed now and then during their pregnancy. It's not a good sign, but it's not necessarily a bad sign if the baby's healthy. It sometimes happens. But you do not have a menstrual cycle while you're pregnant, because we're blocking FSH, which is what starts the whole thing off in the first place. Now, we're all set up for pregnancy. Now, how often is this going to wind up in pregnancy? Don't say too often, that's a cheap shot.
Let's do some calculations. Let's suppose, we'll be conservative, that a woman becomes fertile at age 15. And let's suppose that she enters menopause at, say, 45. Okay? Those are perfectly reasonable figures. So how long is that reproductive span? 30 years? Okay, 30 years. And although there are 12 months in a year, shall we say 10 menstruations per year? Because frankly, sometimes we get sick and the cycle doesn't work. Women who do marathons, who have cut so much fat out of their body because of illness or because of exercise, find that they don't make enough of the steroid hormones to sustain a menstrual cycle. And it's not that they're sick, they just don't have the bodily resources to do it. So, at 10 per year, what did I say, 30 years? That turns out to be about, what, 300 menstrual cycles in a woman's lifespan? All right, so you can always say, okay, that's one more down. Okay, we'll get to that. Why this rush to get over? But there's only about 300 menstrual cycles that you got in a woman's lifespan. Do women have 300 children? Not really. The maximum number of children that a woman ever had was like about 70. No, but you know, I think it's, I'll show you the Guinness Book of World Records later. It's close to 770. She had triplets and quadruplets, and she started young, and she got the Medal of Women's Soviet Glory of producing workers that could run tractors. But ignoring all that, what are the chances that the egg then gets fertilized? Not very well. Not very well. So the typical condition, all of this jabber was just to tell you that the typical condition is the egg's not going to get fertilized. Now, what happens next? We can make a list, and we can title this The Cause of Menstruation. Number 1, cause of menstruation. You know, I need to be taller.
Let me catch you in a natural pause.
Yes.
For whatever reason, this is not operating properly, and I don't have time during your class to test it out.
Perfectly
So
fine.
this is out of play for today.
Okay, no,
We'll come back and check it out.
thank you, appreciate it. No problem. Okay. Wait, I'm not tall enough. Menstrual cycle, cause of menstruation, whatever you title that. Number 1, the corpus luteum degenerates. No, it doesn't take the drinking and gambling, but it just simply shrinks and doesn't function anymore. And you sort of saw this maybe in lab in some pictures in the cattle where you might see some leftover corpus lutei, corpi lutei, which are not functional. Well, then of course what then happens, what did the corpus luteum used to do? It produced progesterone. And so we get a drop in progesterone. Yeah, if you were a clever sleuth, you'd say, what did progesterone used to do? Progesterone used to cause these uterine glands to secrete. So number 3, uterine glands stop secreting. Okay. Well, what happens then? What happens to an air mattress when you let the air out of it? Water vanish. So number 4, the endometrium shrinks. And then what happens is the spiral arterioles get blocked. Number 5, the spiral arterioles, and I'm going to use the word kink just because you will understand that. You can also use the term occlude, which is like bending a garden hose, but you know, you can understand that concept. And so they no longer have blood supply to the stratum functionalis. So number 6, the stratum functionalis dies and is shed. So what is the menstrual flow? The menstrual flow is actually combination of the tissue of the stratum functionalis and, okay, here we go, back up, and well, the blood that's there from the ends of the straight arterioles. And you'd think, well, gee, you know, if I cut myself, it only takes 5 minutes, 10 minutes to stop bleeding. How come that goes on for a couple of days? Well, it's those darn cramps, and it's very deliberate. You know, you just keep doing this to that cut that you've got, likely it might keep bleeding for quite a while. And it is actually rather deliberate, but may I do this for just a moment here? Is it half web, which I would prevent? This seems fine. Yes. Okay. No, this is not right. I do not wish to go half web. I wish to go to WebCT, which I can find here. As you can see, I'm running this quickly over to our place. You'd be surprised. My wife has the same email, except RL Sundrew. When she's in mathematics, I get email now and then saying, improve your math courses. And my password is ... Oh my gosh, you saw that. No, don't remember this password. This thing wouldn't remember it anyhow. Oh, there's an error. Should we run it? Of course they should run it. This thing whines. Should I block this? No. Right. I hope that the new thing does. Oh, somebody stated something good. Let's go here. And hey, there's a lovely background. There it is. Female reproductive system. Let's pretend we're a student. And then we can take a look at it this way. And blah, blah, and blah, blah, and the menstrual cycle. Yep. The menstrual cycle is further on down, but I have a note right in here that I want to take a look at. Endometriosis. Endometriosis occurs when cells in the endometrium leave the uterus through the uterine tubes and implant somewhere in the pelvis. Have I discussed this? No. They wander. And these wandering cells usually wind up somewhere in the pelvis on some peritoneal membranes. Unfortunately, they react to the same hormones, which means that they thicken and enlarge. And then when the level of progesterone drops, it triggers them to bleed. Essentially, someone with endometriosis suffers regular internal hemorrhaging, bleeding. Now, what's the trigger for all of this? The drop in progesterone. I want you to emphasize that in your notes. What triggers the menstrual flow? Drop in progesterone. What causes the pain in endometriosis, which is severe? And again, it's not that uncommon. Anybody know anybody that has endometriosis? A few. Okay, check this here link. And I do like to, when I give you links, usually it's supplemental information. If you never go to any of the links, you'll know everything yet that will be on the tests. All right. But here it goes into a detail about it. This can lead to pain, irregular bleeding, problems getting pregnant, which is known as infertility. And women with endometriosis typically have tissue implant on the ovaries, bowel, rectum, bladder, lining of the pelvic area, etc., etc., etc. Well, you know, part of the cure for that is to reach menopause. And that helps a little bit. For some women, it's while they're pregnant that they're not getting the cycle, and so they get some relief while they're pregnant, but then the menstrual cycle starts up again. And you can read more about it. It has lots of symptoms, and there's various treatments, which I won't go into. I want you to know the definition of endometriosis. Cells have wandered astray from the endometrium and implanted elsewhere. Why does it do that? I don't know. It says here, endometriosis is still a fairly unknown illness, in spite of the fact it's one of the most common gynecological problems. And what drives a woman to go see her gynecologist is probably a lot of pelvic pain, and it takes some time. Well, you can go on and look at that again more later. Okay, then we went through hysterectomy, blood supply, the external anatomy, which we will get to later. Menstrual cycle. Here we go. Now, I did this just for laziness so I can show you the part here where it talks about the average cycle. Now, again, if I do a zoom to 125, we should be able to see there, just slightly larger print. I did that. Here we go, the average cycle. 28 days, waxing and waning of the moon. I know, 30 days, half September, April, June, and November, except for somebody else. But that's just because we filled with the calendar to make it fit 1 year. The lunar month is 28 days. Now, some terminology, which I thought, oh, I know what happened. I did work on this, and then I failed to save it in a place to find it again. But I should have set this up much better. The first time you menstruate is the menarche, and I can't edit this. This is student view. Menarche. You see the word? Okay. Can you see the spelling on it? Okay. It means, arch means the beginnings, like archaeology is the study of the beginnings of man, primitive history. Menarche is the first time that the menstrual cycle takes place. That's different than the word puberty. Puberty are the physiological and psychological changes. Here, I'll just emphasize it right on the screen, okay? Of course, I won't do that. But I have seen whiteboards that have marks that can't be erased because somebody brought their permanent marker from home. When they first got this technology, we don't see that much now. And I know there's jokes about seeing whiteout on the computer screen, but it's not funny anymore because most people don't know what whiteout is all about. So please, menarche is a term you probably haven't heard, but that's the date on the calendar. Puberty are these physiological and psychological changes. The physiological we've talked about before. You know, the broadening of the hips, development of the breasts, secondary sexual characteristics, growth spurt perhaps included in there. Psycho, yeah, I like that beginning. Psychological changes. You've got this, you know, sweet prepubescent girl that helps with the dishes, you know, is fun to be with, and all of a sudden her hair spiked, you know, in purple, and she's got metal all over her face and an attitude. And she goes up into her room and she sobs because she's 13 and doesn't need any other excuse. And some take it with grace. Once again, don't judge other people by your own experiences. Some of you raise daughters and it is a rough life. And some of you raise daughters and they're your best friends and it's just fun. And every experience is going to be different. You just can't say to somebody else, oh, you've got daughters? Oh, you poor dear. And they're thinking, this is one of the great blessings of my life. So it varies. May you have good experience. I had 3 boys and they were great kids. So we just had, it was fun. A little bit of discipline now and then. Like one time, my boy doesn't come home when we expect him to. You know, he said, yeah, I'll be home at 11. You know, dance, out, wretched car, which was he loved. And it's 11:30, hadn't shown up yet. Got close to 12, so I called the township police. I described the car. I said, you know, he's out, you know, past. We just want you to be aware of him. Now he comes in, he says, oh, gee, Dad, I'm sorry. I said, no, that's all right, wait a minute. I called the police and I said, no, he's home now, you can cancel the alert. And please don't mind that, you know. And he said, you called the police? I said, yeah. You weren't here when we expected you. And so,
I thought he has been missing for 24 hours before they do it.
For what?
24 hours.
Before what?
Before they can put an alert.
Yeah, but this is just a local township police, and it wasn't missing persons. I was just simply saying he didn't come home when expected.
Didn't he have a cell phone or there were no cell phones back then?
Cell phones. You are so young. What a sweet person. No, come on now. There's no such thing as cell phones back then. No. But anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean, I did want to share that with you. It was just kind of a funny thing. But, you know, there are gentle ways of helping the people get respect. Anyway, sorry about that. Now, shutting down. Oh, the average, by the way, 10 to 16, bell-shaped curve. Average is like around 13 years of age. Okay. But there's always those who a couple years early get their growth spurt and their development, and those that are pushing into 16 and they're the skinny mini short people, you know, no changes. Think, oh man, you know, what's going on here? So, being a teenager is heck anyways. When does it shut down? The last menstruation is menopause. Please make note, that's just a date on the calendar. What are the changes that occur? It's called a climacteric. That's the new word that you may not have heard of before. But that's the kind of the counterpart of puberty, which is when it begins. And so if you say, well, my Aunt Gussie, you know, is having, you know, a crisis or whatever, she's going through menopause, that's okay because that's the way we use it outside of the medical setting. But when I test you on that, menopause is just the date. It's not the changes. Now, you say, are there changes at menopause? Yeah, there are. You know, when those hormones, which is the root of the problem, start cycling, there's some adjustment to learn how to deal with it with grace. When they stop, you get some physical changes that you may not be happy with. And there are some emotional changes in some women as well, sometimes severe. Bell-shaped curve. One lady goes through menopause, hardly even aware of it. Somebody else is, you know, whoosh, hot flashing all over the place, power surging. And somebody else that just really needs medical support because life gets awfully rough. It varies. It's a broad range, 35 to 58, roughly around age 50. Okay, but it's a flat shape on there, so it's not like at 49 you can expect it, and at 51 you're late. Kind of a broad thing. And if it would just shut down and be done with it, that wouldn't be all that terribly bad. But sometimes, some of you know what it's like to have an old cheap car that you turn it off and it won't stop. And so you go without the menstrual period for 3 months and you say, oh good, it's over. I don't need birth control anymore. Okay. Next week. Dysmenorrhea. Dysmenorrhea. Painful. You know, sometimes I stop a story like that and simply assume that everybody understands the consequences. But there are sometimes very late pregnancies that occur because the woman thinks that the menstrual cycle has ended and it merely stuttered a little bit but hadn't totally died. Dysmenorrhea. Now there's that root menses, dys meaning difficult or painful, rhea meaning a discharge. It's just painful menstruation. And here is why. Bold print. The uterus produces prostaglandin. Prostaglandin. Say, wait a minute, that hormone prostaglandin, I thought that that was what we find in seminal fluid, that it was named after the prostate, but we know that the seminal vesicles actually produce it. But it turns out that, yes, a woman's uterus produces prostaglandin as well. This is actually a relatively common hormone, not even just in that area. And unfortunately, her uterus is producing this hormone that's named after a gland in the guy that doesn't even make it in the first place. Go figure. Some things about prostaglandin. It is constantly produced. So it's not a cycle in prostaglandin, it's just always there. But its action is blocked by progesterone, which does cycle. And number 3, what does prostaglandin do? It causes uterine contractions. Okay, so let's think about this mechanism. Prostaglandin makes the uterus contract. But as long as you've got a decent level of progesterone, it won't function. So the uterus remains quiet. But what triggers the menstrual flow? The drop in progesterone triggers the menstrual flow. And when the progesterone level drops, then what happens at the same time? Now it is free to cause uterine contractions. Common name, cramps. These are the menstrual cramps, and now you know why it occurs. The drop in progesterone that triggers the menstrual flow also frees up prostaglandin to cause the uterine contractions. When the progesterone level drops because the corpus luteum degenerates, then prostaglandin is free to cause these contractions. This can be severe for some women, especially those with irregular menstrual cycles. If you have regular menstrual cycles, you know, it doesn't have to be 28 days. Once again, bell-shaped curve. Some women cycle at 30 days or longer. Some women 26 days, even shorter. If it's regular, that's okay. Doesn't matter that it's long or short. But irregularity can lead to sometimes painful menstruation. At Hershey Medical Center, they discovered also that if you have irregular menstrual cycles, you don't load up calcium in your bones well. I don't know the connection. But they have shown that teenagers with irregular menstrual cycles do not put calcium into their bones the way that a woman with regular menstrual cycles would. And so they said, well, what can we do to help regulate these menstrual cycles? Let's give them a medication that includes both estrogen and progesterone. Now, this medication of estrogen and progesterone, why are we giving both? Well, what's the estrogen going to do? It's going to cause the endometrium to thicken and enlarge during the beginnings of this 28-day period on the average. What is the progesterone going to do? It's going to cause these uterine glands to function. And so just like the woman's own hormones would do, it builds it up. But when the woman stops taking this medication, the progesterone level drops because she's not taking this medication. What triggers the menstrual flow? The drop in progesterone. And so we found that these women could regulate their menstrual cycles into a regular 28-day cycle by taking this medication and then not taking it. Well, I kind of cheated up here. I didn't want to call it the pill because that gives you a clue as to the side effects. What's one other function of progesterone besides causing the uterine glands to secrete? It blocks FSH. And you know, let me tell you that your pituitary ain't that smart. And so it says, okay, calendar says time to start another cycle. I shall have this body ovulate, and it gets ready to release some follicle-stimulating hormone, but she's popping the pill and says, well, look at that. There's already progesterone, so I guess we don't have to. And so the woman does not ovulate. Month after month, they would not ovulate. Remember I mentioned how in Viagra they worked on prisoners, they were trying to control their blood pressure and discovered a curious side effect of the medication? Well, they discovered that the side effect on this was simply it interferes with ovulation, and thereby it became a contraceptive method. Many women with totally regular menstrual cycles take this medication, which they call the pill, in order to prevent pregnancy. What's its percentage of effectiveness about?
99.
99. It's really effective. It's pretty good. It's almost up to abstinence, and you know, as far as being totally harmless, no side effects.
No.
What are the side effects? What? Side effects.
Blood clots.
Blood clots is one that can happen. What if you take the pill and smoke? Synergistic effect, it's even worse. So, you know, it's a balance. The pill has its side effects, but frankly, many of the powerful medications that we take nowadays to control our blood pressure and other things has side effects, and you have to weigh the balance. You say, okay, increased possibility of blood clots, but on the other hand, if I don't take the pill and I get pregnant, there are some implications of that as well. And so, yeah, it's a risk that many of us will quite willing to know. You know, it's far more dangerous to drive to Florida than fly. But I've got a friend, his wife will not get in an airplane, and so they will drive to Florida once a year, even though that is far more dangerous than getting on an airplane. But it has nothing to do with risk factors and everything to do with emotions and psychology. So anyway, there you go. The pill is estrogen and progesterone. Why does the estrogen have to be there? Because if you do not release follicle-stimulating hormone, you never get a Graafian follicle that's giving you the estrogen in the first place. The estrogen is there to maintain her sexual characteristics. And the progesterone is there to block the pregnancy. And I'll tell you, when they first came up with this medication, It had like, I don't know, 5 or 10 times the dosage that it does now. And if you think that hitting puberty would make you go crazy, some women had to get off the pill because they could not deal with the emotional side effects. Even now, some women have some trouble with it, but it's a much lesser dosage, more better adjusted. Any comments or questions on this connection? Yes?
Young girls are someone with pill, also for acne, nothing to do with sexual.
To deal with acne in order to control, because you're controlling the amount of dosage that's setting those off. Very good, thank you. Yeah? Okay. So that kind of explains that, which brings us to this concept here. I actually should be able to pull this up without having that frame around it, but at this point,
If you hit those arrows over here on the right, that'll disappear on the left, far left.
on the left.
Right there, there's look, 2 arrows. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right. I can do that. Now, if I could only get rid of this top part a bit more, but I don't think I can do that. So, there we go. What if I do this? Oh no, that's cute, but that was no. All right, PMS, taken from an article. First of all, do you know what the letters PMS stand for? Premenstrual syndrome. So, PMS equals premenstrual syndrome. To be honest, pre is kind of may not want to be there because it also includes, involves the menstrual flow itself and the cramps that accompany it. But some of it begins back when that progesterone level starts to drop, and before the menstrual flow actually occurs. So it used to be called decades ago, which of course I can remember, back before there were cell phones. I remember before there were answering machines. Can you imagine a social life in which you simply had to call somebody and hope they were home? No answering machine, none whatsoever. That was life, You dropped by to see if they were in. No, they weren't in, so you went home. You weren't disappointed by it. It was just life. People had thoughts. They pondered about life. They ate bacon, died early of heart attacks. What are the symptoms of PMS? Once again, it varies from woman to woman, but let's make just a little list. No, let's not. I don't use the word depression, though. That's why I really should make my own list on this. The better terminology for this, and again, that was me being lazy and not having enough time. The list of PMS symptoms, one of them includes emotional irritability. And we mentioned this concept before, but I want to mention it again. It does not mean anger. It can mean sadness. It can mean manic joy. Your emotions are heightened in all directions. And that's what irritable means, simply response. Your muscles are irritable. Poke, contract. They respond. And so what happens is emotions are heightened. If you get angry at something ordinarily, then you'll get angrier. If you get sad at something ordinary, I don't know that you want to see Breaking Dawn or something, At that point, or you'll have to be hauled out on the stretcher, I'm so sad. Yeah, Stephanie Myers appeared here. Emotional irritability just means that the emotional response is heightened. Now that alone is what has sometimes made women difficult for men to figure out, because it's not obvious to us what stage you're in. And so we'll tell some joke, which I'm not even going to mention, that might be annoying to you. But ordinarily you'll say, yeah, it's cute. And then at this point you say, okay, that's the door, don't let it get you on your way out. Goodbye. And so this unpredictability. I had one man, and this is another weird thing, I cannot explain this, why women who share living quarters gradually tend to synchronize their menstrual cycles. But this has been commonly documented by colleges. We've got maybe 4 women sharing a dorm, they cook for themselves and everything. Works out nice, but by the end of 2 semesters, we find they have tended to go in synchronization. I don't know why. If you, don't give me rumors. If you ever have a documented reason as to why that tends to happen, let me know. But one man said that my wife and my 3 teenage daughters are in sync, and there's a time of the month where he just leaves home. Because he just can't deal with it. What'd you say?
My dad, he had my mom and her 4 girls, and we were the
4
same
girls.
thing. Yeah, poor mom for dad.
Yeah, okay. Okay, what are some other things that we might mention in here? Well, in no particular order, there's things like headaches, there's breast pain, tenderness perhaps, meaning sore. Breast pain can occur as the hormones are affecting the actual glandular portion. Salt craving. And accompanying that, edema. And so for some reason, going after the salty chips seems especially attractive. But you also tend to accumulate weight. It's like your kidneys are just not doing the job that they ought to do. And you step on the scales, and it is the wrong time of the month to realize that you're weight down, the edema has made it come up. And, you know, saying, well, just cut out the salt, it's also the worst time of the month to have the willpower to want to cut out the salt. So there's problems like that. What am I missing here? Pelvic discomfort. What did I just describe? Cramps, things like that. What do they got over here?
Increase acne problems.
Yeah, acne. Want to flare up at this time? Back pain,
Fatigue.
joint pain, clumsiness, back pain, eye problems, the weight gain, which is the edema, things like that. And then extreme cases. Bell-shaped curve again. Most women have had to deal with this since there were human beings. And so, you know, the bowel disorders, seizures, suicidal thoughts, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, if life is bad for you normally, then the PMS can make it even worse. Over 100 different symptoms have been observed, each woman reporting her own unique set. What's the rule of thumb for this last part? Don't judge other women by yourselves. Your experience, ladies, with this will not be the same as your friends. This is why men leave when women get together and start talking. Because they'll start talking about when they went into labor because they had babies, or they'll start talking about their menstrual PMS symptoms, and the guys go somewhere else and talk about sports and safe material like that. I don't think you can blame us, but there you are. Et cetera, et cetera. Then there's the timing, blah, 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 blah. And is there a cure? Well, you know, the says the cause of PMS is unknown. You say it's unknown? Well, we know that it's those hormones that are doing the thing, but it's a very complicated response to it. But it goes on to say, you know, do some record keeping on it, recommend getting rest, exercising every day, eliminating salt, oh yeah, sugar, caffeine, and alcohol. Yeah, going to a convent, you know, vitamin therapy, especially the B vitamins. Watch out for that. Many recommend. There's a huge psychological part on that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, well, anyway, I just threw that one in there towards the end. It's just a matter of let's see, did that. Oh, chocolate craving, by the way. Had a woman raise her hand and said, chocolate craving. I said, no. Where did we get chocolate from? Yeah, I think yesterday was or today was the day that Columbus first discovered Indian smoking tobacco. And, you know, it's one of the things they gave us. Guess where we got chocolate from? Milton Hershey. Milton Hershey, absolutely, the man who invented chocolate. Well, of course, it's a South American plant, potato plant, you know, from South America and that. And so the original chocolate cakes, by the way, were just no sugar and no milk in them. It was just bitter chocolate. But it, you know, it energized you. It was, you know, a drink that they drank. And you're going to drink some of the other stuff we drink. The kale wasn't bad. Then they added sugar, and that was nicer. Then they added milk. I think it was Hershey that actually, wasn't he the one that pioneered adding milk to the candies that you make from it? Perhaps. So at least he took advantage of it and got rich doing it. So I said, no, you can't be chocolate craving because we've only, you know, had it for a couple hundred years. You know, it's not in our genes. And she said, there is chocolate craving. But this good woman went home and did some research, and there's 2 things that chocolate has. Number 1, all candy bars are high in salt. You don't taste it because you got all that chocolate and sugar on it. There's a lot of salt in there as well. You know, I never knew that ketchup was rich in sugar. Because ketchup for me was from my childhood. And so it tasted like ketchup. It's like ketchup, like ketchup. And one of my kids said, gee, this ketchup tastes too sweet. I said, sweet? Is there sweetness in it? I didn't realize it's a high sugar preparation. All right, so there's a lot of salt in chocolate, and there's another thing in chocolate, a non-testable drug, theobromide, which happens to be, and not terribly powerful, but it's an antidepressant. And it is absolutely true that if you consume some chocolate, that it has a mild antidepressant on your nervous system. And so if you happen to be having PMS and you eat a chocolate bar, Hershey, stay at home, then you will find that you feel a little better because of that. And part of it you might say, well, yeah, I went off my diet, I had some chocolate, that's great. But it also makes you feel better. And next month, when you're in that same psychological bent, guess what you're reaching for? A chocolate bar. So it could be conditioning, but I'll accept chocolate craving as being part of that. Okay, there, I managed to get us close enough to the end. I'll let you go a few minutes early. And Thursday, we should have the call. And we'll see you then. Oh, our quiz, just so you know, I'm looking at the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. I'm looking at it. It could easily slip to the Thursday.